He didn't have much, just a beat-up truck, a kind heart, and a son who still believed in good people. She had no purse, no ride, and no one left who believed in her. When a struggling single dad stopped to help a woman kicked out of a car dealership, he thought it was just another act of kindness. But what he didn't know was who she really was. And the next morning, her Rolls-Royce pulled up to his front yard. What happened next changed all three of their lives forever. If you believe in second chances, quiet miracles, and the kind of love that shows up when we least expect it, hit that subscribe button and join us for more stories that speak to the heart. Now, let's begin. The last snow of winter had melted into slush along the roadsides of Pine Ridge, a small town stitched together by sawdust, faith, and routine. Griffin Wade, 38, adjusted the wool cap on his head as he tightened the straps around the firewood in the back of his dented Ford pickup. His calloused hands moved with the precision of someone who worked with wood for a living. Quiet work, honest work, the kind of work that didn't make a man rich but helped him sleep well at night. Max, his 7-year-old son, was in the passenger seat, humming a tune Griffin didn't recognize. Griffin smiled at the sound, soft, almost like background music in the movie of his life. It was just the two of them now. Has been for years. And that was okay. He pulled out of the parking lot of Wilson's Hardware and was just about to take a left onto Main Street when he saw her. She was standing alone outside Langston Motors, the town's only luxury car dealership. She wasn't dressed for car shopping. Not by Pine Ridge standards and certainly not by Langston's. Her coat was threadbare, her boots muddy, and she clutched a torn canvas bag to her chest like it contained the last pieces of her life. Griffin watched as a sharply dressed salesman leaned toward her, his voice raised just enough for Griffin to catch the snippets. "We don't do walk-ins without an appointment. Ma'am, please, if you don't intend to purchase—" The woman flinched, nodded, and turned away. Her shoulders slumped beneath the weight of something Griffin couldn't name, but instinctively understood. Max looked up. "Daddy, why is that lady sad?" Griffin didn't answer right away. Instead, he pulled the truck to the curb. "Where are we going?" Max asked. "To do something good," Griffin said quietly, and stepped out into the wind. He jogged across the street just as the woman began walking toward the bus stop. She didn't hear him approach, not until he cleared his throat softly. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said, voice calm, gentle. "Do you need a ride somewhere?" She turned slowly. Her eyes were a color between storm and smoke, and for a moment, Griffin felt like he'd walked into someone else's memory. There was something haunted in her expression. Something beautiful, too, in a fragile, unfinished sort of way. She looked him up and down, suspicious. "You don't know me." "No, I don't," Griffin agreed. "But I saw what happened, and I figure folks deserve better than that. If you need to get somewhere safe, I can take you. I'm Griffin. My son's in the truck. We're harmless, I promise." She hesitated, looked past him at the old pickup truck, at the boy with the big eyes waving from the passenger seat. Finally, she whispered, "Okay." They didn't talk much on the drive. The heater wheezed, Max kicked his feet happily, and Griffin snuck glances in the rearview mirror at the stranger he'd just invited into his life for a few quiet minutes. When they reached the old roadside motel near the edge of town, she opened the door but paused. "Thank you," she said. "You got a name?" Griffin asked gently. She hesitated, then smiled, just a little. "Mira." He nodded. "Take care, Mira." She walked away without looking back. Griffin sat for a long moment before pulling out. Max broke the silence first. "She was pretty." Griffin chuckled. "Yeah, she was." The next morning was colder. The kind of morning that got into your bones before you even stepped outside. Griffin opened his front door and nearly tripped over a small brown paper bag. Inside was a thermos of coffee, 2 blueberry muffins, and a note written in neat, looping cursive. For someone who stops for strangers. Mira. Griffin read the note twice, then a third time. He smiled without knowing it, a rare thing these days. 3 hours later, while Griffin sanded the edge of a cedar bench for Mrs. Callahan's porch, his phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. Thank you again, Griffin. If you ever need help, remember that kindness echoes. Always. M. He stared at the message for a long while. Something about this woman, this Mira, didn't quite fit. She had no purse, no phone in her hand, no last name. And yet, there was a calm authority in the way she carried herself, even as she walked away from humiliation. She wasn't just someone down on her luck. She was running from something, or perhaps someone. And as Griffin stared out across the still, quiet landscape of Pine Ridge, he didn't yet know that the woman he gave a ride to yesterday would soon arrive in a car that would stop the entire town cold. A Rolls-Royce, with his name on the delivery envelope. Griffin hadn't expected to see her again, not in a town like Pine Ridge where things didn't just happen, where people kept to themselves and strangers passed through like mist. But as he stood in his modest kitchen, pouring the steaming contents of Mira's thermos into his chipped mug, he couldn't stop wondering who she really was, and why she'd left the note. Max sat at the kitchen table, swinging his legs under the chair, half listening to the morning cartoons and half doodling with crayons on a wrinkled piece of printer paper. She was nice, Max said, without looking up. Griffin glanced over. Who? The lady you helped, Mira. Griffin stirred sugar into his coffee. Yeah, she was. Are we going to see her again? Griffin didn't answer right away. Instead, he leaned on the counter, letting the warmth of the cup seep into his hands. I don't know, Bud. Some people just pass through, like fireflies. You see the light, but it doesn't stay long. Max squinted. That's kind of sad. Yeah, Griffin murmured, almost to himself. It is. By mid-morning, Griffin had driven to a client's property up near Ash Hollow Road to assess a porch repair. As he stepped out of the truck and walked around the sagging wooden steps, his phone buzzed again. Unknown number. Didn't want to leave without saying thank you, but I didn't think I'd know how to say goodbye. Mira. He stared at the message. Goodbye? They'd barely said hello. He typed a reply, then erased it. Typed again, erased again. Finally, he pocketed the phone and got back to work. But something about her message clung to him like the scent of cedar on a woodworker's shirt. Subtle, stubborn, impossible to ignore. That evening, Griffin and Max stopped by the grocery store. It was one of those ordinary moments. A small basket of basics, Max begging for chocolate milk, and Griffin half listening to the cashier's complaints about the new self-checkout machine, when he heard a voice behind him. She liked blueberry muffins, said a gentle voice. Griffin turned. Standing just outside the automatic doors, half hidden in the golden spill of sunset, was Mrs. Harper Lane. She was in her 60s, with snow-white hair pinned neatly at the nape of her neck, and the kind of posture that whispered of both grace and grief. She was something of a local legend. Quietly wealthy, impossibly kind, and completely uninterested in the gossip that buzzed like flies in small towns. Mrs. Lane, Griffin said, startled. Evening, she smiled. Evening, Mr. Wade. You knew Mira? He asked, surprised by his own forwardness. Mrs. Lane didn't answer right away. Instead, she reached into her coat and pulled out a small envelope. Give this to your son, she said softly. He's the reason she smiled that day. Griffin hesitated. Why are you? But she had already turned and begun walking away, the hem of her long coat catching the breeze like a quiet wave. Back home, Griffin opened the envelope with Max. Inside was a hand-drawn card childlike, messy, but unmistakably sincere. On the front was a simple pencil sketch. A woman standing in the snow, smiling down at a little boy holding a muffin. Inside the card, in Mira's handwriting, "To Max, you gave me something I hadn't felt in a long time. Belonging. Thank you for seeing me." "Mira?" Griffin sat in silence. Max touched the drawing gently. "She remembered me." "She did," Griffin said, voice low. The next morning, life went on. Griffin cut wood, repaired fences, answered calls from neighbors. He didn't mention Mira to anyone. Not because she didn't matter, but because she did. Too much. Still, the mystery gnawed at him. Who was she really? Why did someone like her have no purse, no car, no reason to be in Pine Ridge, and yet leave behind gestures of such quiet elegance? As he packed up his truck late that afternoon, his phone buzzed once more. Unknown number. There are things I wish I could explain. Maybe someday I will. But for now, thank you for seeing me. M. Griffin read the message, standing there beside his truck in the growing twilight. The wind had picked up again, and the first hints of spring stirred in the trees above. He typed back, "If you ever need another ride, no questions asked, just say the word." 3 days passed. Griffin told himself to forget it, told himself people like her didn't stay, told himself he was foolish for thinking otherwise. Until the 4th day. A low hum broke the stillness of early morning. Griffin stepped out onto his porch and stopped cold. A Rolls-Royce, sleek, black, and utterly out of place in Pine Ridge, was pulling into his driveway. Max, still in his pajamas, peeked from behind the screen door. Whoa. The car came to a smooth stop. A suited driver stepped out and opened the back door. No one emerged. Instead, the driver walked toward Griffin and handed him a sealed envelope. Griffin took it, his hands instinctively steady, though his heart was anything but. The envelope was ivory, the handwriting elegant. It read, "To the man who gave me something money never could." The envelope sat unopened on the kitchen counter. Griffin hadn't touched it since the driver left. He hadn't even looked inside the Rolls-Royce, though Max had pressed his nose to the glass, whispering, "It smells like fancy in there." The morning sun cast soft lines across the table, catching the golden seal on the back of the envelope. It looked like something from another world, too pristine, too intentional. Like it didn't belong in a house with mismatched mugs and cracked linoleum floors. Griffin poured himself a second cup of coffee and stared at it. "Are you going to open it?" Max asked, still in his flannel pajamas, balancing a spoonful of cereal in midair. Griffin didn't answer right away. Part of him didn't want to. Part of him feared that whatever was inside would change something, and he wasn't sure he was ready for anything to change. But curiosity had a way of outlasting fear. He peeled the seal slowly, carefully, like the paper might bite. Inside was a single sheet of heavy stationery, thick and smooth beneath his fingers. The handwriting was Mira's, elegant, curved, as if each word had been carved rather than written. "Dear Griffin, I've spent most of my life surrounded by people who talk over me, around me, or to me, but rarely with me. You didn't ask for anything, you didn't assume anything, you just saw me, and that is a gift I haven't known in years. I'm leaving town soon. I can't explain everything, not yet, but I wanted you to know this. What you did mattered, to me, to Max, to the part of myself I thought I'd lost. If you ever need anything, truly anything, call this number. No questions, just say your name." With quiet gratitude, Mira Griffin stared at the letter for a long time. Max leaned closer. What did she say? Griffin folded the paper slowly and placed it back inside the envelope. She said thank you, That's all? No, Griffin said, his voice softer now. That's everything. That afternoon, Griffin took a drive. Not for work, not for errands, just to clear his mind. He found himself on the forest backroads outside town, where the trees grew taller and older and wiser than anything made by man. The kind of place where people went to think, or to forget. He parked near a trailhead and wandered down a path lined with pine needles and silence. The wind whispered through the branches, and the quiet wrapped around him like a familiar coat. He thought about Mira, about how a woman with no purse, no car, and no explanation had managed to carve a space in his life that no one else had touched in years. He wasn't naive. He'd seen what kind of car that was. He'd felt the weight of that envelope, the richness of the paper. Mira wasn't just passing through. She was hiding. And not just from a place or a person, but from a life. Later, back in town, Griffin stopped by the local diner for a coffee refill. Ms. Dottie, who'd been working the counter for the better part of 4 decades, gave him a side-eye smile. "You've got that faraway look," she said as she poured the coffee. "Like a man who just met a ghost and can't decide if he wants her to stay or go." Griffin chuckled. "Is it that obvious?" Dottie leaned on the counter. "You've been quiet for a few days. Then a car like that shows up in your driveway?" She raised an eyebrow. "In Pine Ridge, that's like dropping a spaceship on Main Street." Griffin nodded. "Yeah, she's not from around here." "No, honey," Dottie said, her voice softening. "But maybe she's trying to be." That night, Griffin pulled out his sketchbook. He hadn't drawn in a long time, not since Max's mother passed. But the pencil felt right in his hand, familiar, honest. He drew the shape of her face, not perfect, but enough to remember. The way her eyes looked not just at people, but into them. The way her coat didn't fit quite right, like it belonged to someone else, or to a version of herself she no longer recognized. The way she stood tall even when she was shrinking inside. By the time he finished, it was well past midnight. Max was asleep, the house was quiet, and the wind outside had stilled. He looked at the drawing again. He didn't know her past, he didn't know her secrets. But he knew this much: she mattered, and that mattered to him. The next day brought rain. Cold, steady, persistent. Griffin canceled his outdoor jobs and took Max to the library, letting the boy explore while he browsed the used book section. He wasn't looking for anything. But he found something anyway, a worn copy of The Secret Garden. He opened the front cover. On the inside flap, written in blue ink, 2M for the days when you feel invisible. Love, Grandma. H. Griffin ran his thumb over the writing. M, Grandma H. His breath caught. Could it be? He checked the checkout stamp. The book had last been borrowed 7 years ago. Still. He walked to the front desk. "Dottie's granddaughter work here today?" he asked the young assistant. "No, but Mrs. Harper Lane comes in on Thursdays. She donates books sometimes." Griffin nodded slowly. Harper Lane. Mira's last name? His thoughts raced. Maybe she wasn't alone in this after all. As he stepped outside, the rain easing into mist, Griffin spotted something at the edge of the woods across from the library. A figure, long coat, boots, a woman. He started to call out, but she turned and disappeared into the trees. A ghost in the woods. Or maybe just someone waiting for the right moment to be found again. The sky over Pine Ridge had turned to soft silver by the time Griffin arrived at the old farmhouse on Ashbury Hill. He hadn't expected a job today, not on a Sunday, but the call had come early that morning. A woman with a quiet voice and a clear purpose. She was restoring a historic home outside town and needed someone who knew how to work with wood. Someone who didn't cut corners. "I was told you're the best," she'd said over the phone. Griffin didn't like flattery, he liked facts, but something in her voice, measured, calm, with just enough sadness wrapped around each syllable, had pulled him in. Now, standing at the edge of the gravel drive, he looked up at the house. It was a beauty, even in its decay. Whitewashed walls once crisp, now softened by age. Shutters dangling by rusted hinges. A wide porch with a sagging swing that seemed to sigh in the breeze. Griffin took a slow breath and knocked. The door opened halfway, and there she was. Mara, not in the tattered coat this time, not in borrowed boots or guarded silence. She wore jeans and a faded green sweater, hair pulled back in a simple knot. Her face held that same grace he remembered, but now it carried something else too. Peace, or at least the beginning of it. Griffin's mouth opened, but no words came. Mira beat him to it. I didn't expect it would be you. Griffin exhaled. You asked for someone who works with wood. Her eyes flickered. I didn't think I'd be seen by someone who saw me. They stood in the doorway, the space between them filled with everything unspoken. Then, softly, she stepped aside. Come in. The inside of the house smelled like thyme and lavender. Old floorboards creaked in protest as Griffin walked through the front parlor, eyes scanning the trim, the arches, the high ceilings. You're restoring this place? He asked. Mira nodded. It belonged to my grandmother. She left it to me. Harper Lane? He asked, glancing over. She smiled, a little surprised. You remember names? I remember people, he replied, then paused. So you are? Mirabelle Lane, she said quietly. But no one calls me that, just Mira. She waited, half expecting him to recoil, to draw a line between her world and his, but he didn't move. Instead, Griffin nodded slowly. Nice to finally know your last name. They spent the next hour walking through the house. Mira pointed out what she wanted done, refinishing the banister, replacing warped planks on the porch, restoring 2 ornate window frames. Griffin listened, asked a few questions, jotted things down in his notebook. But mostly he watched her. The way she touched the walls with reverence. The way she looked out the window, as if measuring not just the light, but the memories it held. This place meant something to her, Griffin said. Mira turned to him. It was the only place she ever told me I was enough. He didn't reply, but the silence between them felt shared. Whole. Later, they sat on the back porch with mugs of strong tea. Max had joined them after Griffin picked him up from a friend's house nearby. He now played in the overgrown garden, chasing a monarch butterfly with slow, exaggerated stealth. Mira watched him with a soft smile. He's beautiful, she said. Griffin followed her gaze. He saved me. From what? Griffin was quiet for a moment. From forgetting how to hope. Mira looked down at her tea. I think we all need someone like that. You got anyone like that? He asked gently. She hesitated, then shook her head. I used to think money could fix anything. Then I thought love would. Turns out, it's presence. Just having someone there, without expectations. Griffin nodded. Someone who stays. Mira met his eyes. Yeah, that. The conversation drifted after that. Books they loved, old music, favorite foods. Mira laughed more than he remembered, and Griffin found himself watching her hands as she spoke, graceful and expressive, like they were telling their own stories. Max soon climbed the steps, cheeks flushed. Miss Mira, he said, climbing into her lap like he'd known her for years. Want to see what I made? She held the drawing carefully. Crayon lines of a tall house, a tree, a porch swing, and 3 stick figures holding hands. "That's you," he pointed, "and that's my dad, and that's me." She blinked back something behind her smile. "You gave me a porch swing?" "Yep," Max said proudly. "Everyone needs a porch swing." Griffin watched her closely. She was holding more than a child's drawing. She was holding belonging. As the sun dipped low, Griffin stood and stretched. "We'll come back tomorrow. I'll get started on the porch and see what lumber we'll need." Mira nodded, standing too. "Thank you for saying yes to the job." "I didn't do it for the money." "I know," she said. They stood at the edge of the porch, the breeze lifting the edge of her sweater, a strand of hair brushing her cheek. "You're not who I thought you were," Griffin said. "Neither are you," Mira replied. He tilted his head. "Who did you think I was?" She smiled. "Just a man offering a ride." Griffin smiled back. "And who are you?" She didn't answer, but in her silence he heard everything he needed to. The next morning, the sun rose with a clarity that felt symbolic. Griffin arrived at the farmhouse early, tools in the back of his truck, sleeves rolled up, ready to work. He found Mira already on the porch, barefoot, coffee mug in hand, wrapped in an old quilt that looked like it had come from another generation. Soft pastels, hand-stitched and worn at the edges. Her hair was still damp from a shower. Her presence, like the air, was cool and quiet. She gave him a sleepy smile. "You're early. You said you wanted the porch swing ready before spring," he replied, climbing the steps. "Spring's not here yet." Griffin's gaze held hers for a moment. "Neither am I, but I'm working on it." Mira looked down into her mug. A smile touched the edge of her lips. "That's a good answer." The work was satisfying, the kind of labor Griffin understood better than most people. The porch swing had been rotting at the base, hanging on by 2 rusty chains and a prayer. He took it down gently, then turned his attention to reinforcing the overhead beams. Inside the house, Max played with his colored pencils at the old dining table. Mira moved from room to room, sanding windowsills, dusting corners, occasionally pausing to glance outside at Griffin. It was a quiet rhythm, familiar, healing. By mid-morning, Griffin was on the porch sanding the new wood planks when Mira stepped out, carrying a second mug of coffee. "You look like a man who wouldn't say no to caffeine," she said. "I look like a man who'd sell a kidney for it," he replied. She laughed and handed it to him, then sat on the steps, pulling the quilt tighter around her shoulders. Griffin sat beside her, careful to keep a respectful distance. The silence between them wasn't awkward. It was the kind that made space for thought. "You ever fix something that didn't want to be fixed?" she asked, not looking at him. "All the time," he said, "but that's usually furniture." "What about people?" Griffin took a long sip before answering. "I don't try to fix people." Mira turned toward him, surprised. "Why not?" "Because people aren't broken chairs," he said gently. "They're stories. You don't fix a story, you listen to it." She stared at him for a moment and he saw it. Something in her eyes loosened, like a knot unraveling just a little. "My story's complicated," she whispered. "All the good ones are." They sat there for a while, sipping coffee, watching the wind carry the last of the winter leaves across the grass. Griffin felt something shift, not in the air, but in himself. A part of him, long dormant, stirred. Not desire, not yet, something quieter, something deeper. Respect, admiration, a gentle curiosity wrapped in warmth. He didn't know where it would lead, and for once, that didn't scare him. After lunch, Mira joined him outside to help stain the porch boards. She rolled up her sleeves, tied back her hair, and sat cross-legged beside him, brush in hand. "You ever done this before?" he asked. "Nope," she said, dipping the brush confidently, "but I can follow instructions." Famous last words. She laughed again, full, unrestrained. Griffin paused, watching her. "What?" she asked. "Nothing," he said, looking away. "Just, you don't laugh like someone who's hiding." She grew quiet. The moment stretched. "I used to," she said softly. "I used to laugh all the time. Loud, without apology. My grandmother said I sounded like Summer." Griffin kept his eyes on the board he was staining. What changed? Mira wiped a streak of stain off her cheek with the back of her hand. "I fell in love with a man who didn't know what to do with someone like me. So he made me smaller, quieter, easier to manage." Griffin's hand stilled. "That's not love." "No," she agreed. "It's control dressed up as affection." He looked at her then, really looked. "And you left?" "I walked out 2 days before the wedding, took a bag, no purse, and disappeared." "And ended up in Pine Ridge," he said, as if the town itself had been waiting for her. She nodded. "I didn't plan to stay, but something about this place, about you and Max, it made me stop running." They sat in silence again, the wind brushing past, birds fluttering nearby as if sensing the tenderness between them. Finally, Mira said, "What about you? What made you stop?" Griffin swallowed. The words were heavy, but not sharp anymore. "My wife, Emma, died when Max was 3, drunk driver, late afternoon. She was picking up art supplies for a class she was teaching. She loved teaching." Mira's eyes filled with quiet sympathy. "I'm so sorry." Griffin nodded. "I thought I'd die too, just not all at once. A little every day, but Max, he wouldn't let me. He asked me to smile for her, just once, said she'd like that." Mira reached out, not to touch him, but to place her hand next to his, close enough to feel warmth, but far enough to respect space. "You did smile?" she asked. Griffin looked at her, his voice rough but certain. "Eventually. And now I'm learning how to laugh again." She smiled gently. "So, we're both relearning." "Yeah," he said, "but I think we're getting there." As the sun began to dip behind the trees, Griffin finished installing the new chains on the freshly stained porch swing. He gave it a gentle push. It creaked once, then settled into a quiet, perfect rhythm. Mira sat in it first, tentatively, then Max climbed up beside her. Griffin stood back and watched them, the woman who had run, and the boy who had stayed, swaying gently on the swing of a house that was finally beginning to feel like home. It had started with soup. Griffin wasn't much of a cook, but he had a decent hand with a crock pot and a steady instinct for timing. That afternoon, with the porch swing complete, and Max insisting they celebrate it properly, Griffin invited Mira to dinner. He hadn't planned anything elaborate. Just chicken and wild rice soup, warm cornbread, and iced tea that leaned a little too sweet. But there was something sacred about cooking for someone. It wasn't the food, it was the intention. It was saying, "Stay a little longer, let me take care of you. Just for tonight." Mira had said yes without hesitation. Now, the house smelled like thyme and butter, and Max had drawn a guest menu in crayon and taped it to the fridge. Griffin set 3 mismatched bowls at the table, ran a hand through his hair in the hallway mirror, and told himself not to read too much into it. She was coming for dinner, not forever. When Mira arrived, she carried a mason jar of lemonade and a loaf of lemon bread wrapped in parchment. Her sweater was soft cream, tucked into jeans, and her hair was half up, loose around her face in gentle waves. She looked present, rooted, like someone who might finally want to stay. Max all but tackled her at the door. You're here, come see what I made." She laughed as she followed him to the table, admiring the crayon menu, clapping at the uneven letters. "You spelled lemonade wrong," she said. Max grinned. "That's part of the charm." Griffin stood in the doorway watching them. Something inside him folded, then opened. She fit there, in his home, in that chair, in that exact moment. And he wasn't used to that kind of softness. It terrified him a little, but he let it in anyway. Dinner was easy, warm, filled with the kind of laughter that made a house feel less like a structure and more like a story. Mira asked Max about his favorite colors, and he launched into a passionate explanation involving dinosaurs, outer space, and the concept of glow-in-the-dark green. Griffin chimed in occasionally, but mostly he listened, watched. He hadn't heard Max this animated since Emma died, and he hadn't seen Mira this still. After dinner, Mira helped dry dishes while Max disappeared to build a Lego spaceship in the living room. "I hope this wasn't too much," Griffin said, handing her a plate. "Too much?" she repeated, glancing at him. "Yeah, I know it's not your usual." Mira paused. "You think you know what my usual is?" "I think," he said, "you used to live in a world where no one ever offered you cornbread without expecting something in return." She dried the plate slowly. "You'd be surprised how rare kindness is when you're rich." "Not surprised," he said, "just disappointed." She looked at him then, really looked. Her voice softened. "You make it look easy, the good." "It's not easy," Griffin said. "It's just better." That was when the knock came. 3 sharp raps at the front door, clean, assertive like a command. Griffin froze. Mira did too. A beat passed, then another. Max peeked from behind the couch. "Is it the mailman?" "At night?" Griffin said quietly. "Nobody, just hang tight, okay?" He walked to the door and opened it slowly. On the other side stood a man in a tailored black coat. Collar high, expression unreadable. His hair was silver at the temples, and he looked more like a banker than a bodyguard, but Griffin knew better. "Can I help you?" Griffin asked. The man gave a short nod. "We're looking for Miss Mirabelle Lane." Griffin turned slightly, but Mira was already there, standing behind him. The man's eyes flickered with relief, then urgency. "Miss, your father has been trying to reach you. Your absence has created complications." Mira's face paled. Griffin glanced at her. "You okay?" She nodded once, tightly. "Excuse us." She stepped out onto the porch, closing the door behind her. Inside, Max whispered, "Is she in trouble?" "No," Griffin said, kneeling down. "But she might need to make a big decision." Max looked up at him. "You'll help her, right?" Griffin hesitated. "Only if she lets me." Outside, Mira stood stiffly across from the man. "I told you not to come here," she said. "Miss Lane, your father is prepared to make public statements. Legal proceedings. He's concerned for your safety." "He's concerned about control," she snapped, "not safety." "You're the only heir to Lane worldwide," the man said. "You can't vanish into the woods forever." "I'm not vanishing," she whispered. "I'm just trying to find who I was before all of that took me." The man straightened his posture. "Then I suggest you do it somewhere less public. This isn't sustainable." "I know," she said, her voice breaking slightly. "I know." He handed her a card. "Call when you're ready." And then he was gone. When Mira came back inside, she didn't speak. She simply took her coat, her purse, and the half-wrapped lemon bread. Griffin watched her. "Mira, I'm sorry," she said, her voice raw. "I never meant to bring chaos into your life. You and Max, you're good, and I'm not ready to break something good again." "You're not breaking anything," he said. But she was already at the door. Max ran to her. Will I see you tomorrow? She crouched down, kissed his forehead. You're my favorite artist. Don't ever stop drawing. And then she left. The house felt colder, quieter, too quiet. Griffin stood in the middle of the room, heart still open, still reaching. But she was gone. Again. The house hadn't felt that quiet since the night Emma died. Griffin sat at the kitchen table long after Max had gone to bed, the untouched remains of dinner congealing on their plates. Mira's lemon bread sat wrapped in parchment, still warm, still whole, like her presence had been. He stared at the chair where she'd sat just an hour before. There was an impression left in the cushion, a faint trace of her perfume in the air, lavender and something citrus. It lingered, gentle and uninvited. He wasn't angry. That was the strange part. He'd expected anger. Expected to feel foolish for letting his guard down again, for letting someone walk through the front door of his heart just as easily as they walked back out of his life. But he wasn't angry. He was sad. And that was worse. The next morning, Max was unusually quiet during breakfast. He stirred his cereal, watching the milk swirl instead of eating. The usual stream of questions about dinosaurs, gravity, why squirrels never blink, was absent. You okay, buddy? Griffin asked. Max shrugged. She left. Griffin nodded. Yeah. Is she coming back? I don't know. Max looked up. Do you want her to? Griffin paused. He thought about her hands dusted with sawdust, her laugh in the kitchen, her stillness when Max handed her that drawing. He thought about the way she looked at the house like it held all the pieces of a life she'd almost forgotten how to build. Yeah, he said finally. I do. Later that afternoon, Griffin returned to the farmhouse. Not for work. He didn't bring any tools. He just needed to see it. To know it hadn't all vanished with her. The house stood quiet beneath a gray sky. He walked the porch, touched the swing they'd finished together. The boards still creaked underfoot in that familiar way, the way old houses do when they remember who once loved them. He sat on the swing and let it move gently beneath him. The breeze carried the scent of pine and distant rain. He closed his eyes and listened to the silence. It didn't feel like emptiness. It felt like waiting. That evening, Griffin received an email. He rarely checked the old account connected to his website. Most of his jobs came by word of mouth or from neighbors passing his number around on paper scraps. But something had nudged him to look. The subject line read, "To the man who builds more than homes." His heart paused. He opened the message. Griffin, I know I left too quickly. I know I should have said more. But when you've spent your life being watched, judged, and managed, saying things plainly feels terrifying. You and Max showed me something I hadn't known in a long time. Freedom without expectation, kindness with no strings, presence that didn't ask me to prove anything first. I left because I thought I'd ruin it. Because I've spent years believing I wasn't made for good things. But maybe I was wrong. Mira. There was no phone number, no address, no invitation to reply, but she'd sent it. And that meant something. 3 days later, Griffin received a phone call. A man introduced himself as a representative from a non-profit initiative in the city. Said someone had recommended Griffin for a wood restoration contract. High-end, intricate work for historic homes being turned into community centers. Griffin blinked, surprised. Who referred me? The man hesitated. She didn't leave a full name. Just said you'd saved a porch and a person. He said yes to the contract. Not because of the money, not because of the prestige, because she remembered. On Friday evening, Griffin took Max to the library. Max ran off to find a book about volcanoes, and Griffin wandered the shelves without a goal until he saw the spine of the secret garden again. He pulled it down and opened the cover. The same inscription was still there. To M, for the days when you feel invisible. Love, Grandma H. He held the book in his hands like a message from a past still whispering its truth. He checked the checkout log again. Still no recent activity, but behind the desk, Mrs. Dotty gave him a long look. You looking for her? She asked gently. Griffin nodded. She left another book last week, Dotty said, reaching beneath the counter. Didn't say much, just said it belonged here now. She handed him a slim volume of poetry. Mary Oliver, dog-eared and soft. Griffin opened it. Inside the front cover was a note. Tell Max the world is still full of wonder, and tell yourself you're allowed to be chosen too. He didn't realize he'd been holding his breath until it escaped in one slow, steady exhale. That night, as he tucked Max into bed, the boy looked up and whispered, You miss her, don't you? Griffin brushed hair from his forehead. Yeah, I do. Then go find her. Griffin smiled. You think it's that simple? Max shrugged. You always say people aren't chairs, they're stories. Griffin raised an eyebrow. So? So, maybe you should go find out how her story ends. The train station in the city was cleaner than Griffin expected, but no less impersonal. He hated cities, hated the way people moved like streams, heads down, all rushing and no looking. But Mira had left him clues, and he was following them. The non-profit office was in a red brick building tucked between an old cathedral and a juice bar where everyone inside looked like they hadn't eaten a proper meal in years. The plaque by the elevator read, The Harper Lane Foundation Restoring Places, Restoring People. He pressed the button and took a breath. The elevator groaned as it climbed, as if bearing the weight of questions too long unasked. The office was quiet, elegant. No receptionist. Just warm light, hardwood floors, and walls lined with framed photos of restored homes. Places that had once been forgotten, now bursting with color, flowers, and community. A door opened down the hall, and there she was. Not Mira, Mrs. Harper Lane. Her hair was pulled back in a simple twist, silver and regal. She wore a navy cardigan over a blouse the color of sky, and her gaze, when it met Griffin's, was calm but knowing. You must be Mr. Wade, she said. Griffin stood awkwardly, suddenly unsure what to do with his hands. Yes, ma'am. She motioned to a chair across from her desk. I was wondering how long it would take you. Griffin sat. You were expecting me? I hoped for it, she said. Mira doesn't leave breadcrumbs often, but when she does, it's because she wants someone to follow. There was a pause. Griffin looked around. This place, it's hers? She built it, Mrs. Lane said, with her own hands and her own money. Every grant, every hammer strike, every life changed. Griffin let that settle. He'd known Mira was more than she let on, but he hadn't known she was this. I thought she ran from all of this, he said. She didn't run from the work, Harper replied softly. She ran from what people expected her to become, a polished figurehead, a trophy for the Lane name. Griffin leaned forward. She told me once. She walked away 2 days before the wedding. Mrs. Lane nodded. She was supposed to marry a venture capitalist from Boston. Good bloodlines, clean shoes, never held a hammer in his life. Her father saw a merger. Mira saw a cage. Griffin exhaled. And you? I saw my granddaughter, Harper said, terrified, brave, and so beautifully stubborn. They sat in silence for a moment. Two people connected not by blood or history, but by the weight of loving the same woman in different ways. She's always had a gift for disappearing, Griffin murmured, and always leaves just enough behind for someone who knows how to look. Griffin reached into his jacket and pulled out the secret garden, the one with the note in the cover. "I think she wanted me to find you," he said. Mrs. Lane took the book gently, her eyes flickering with recognition. "I gave her this the day she left the house the first time," she said, "when she was 17. Her father had arranged a dinner with an investment firm. Mira showed up in jeans and a t-shirt, quoting poetry instead of market projections. She smiled. I told her that day, if they ever stop seeing you, go where you can be seen again." Griffin swallowed. "That's what she said about me, that I saw her." Harper nodded, her expression softening. "You did. That's why she left, and that's why she wrote to you after." Griffin's voice dropped. "I want to find her. Not just for me, for Max. She meant something to him, to both of us." Harper Lane stood, walked to a tall cabinet, and opened a small drawer. From it, she pulled a leather-bound sketchbook, worn, thick, the edges curled slightly. "She left this here 3 days ago," Harper said, offering it to him. "Said she didn't need to carry it anymore." Griffin took it gently, opened to the first page. Inside were sketches: his porch, Max's drawings, Mira's face in soft pencil strokes, the swing, a boy with stick legs holding a muffin, page after page, their life captured in pieces. His throat tightened. "She never said any of this." "She didn't have to," Harper replied. "But I'll tell you this, Mr. Wade. Mira isn't waiting for someone to chase her. She's waiting for someone to show up." Griffin looked up. "Do you know where she is?" Harper smiled. "Yes. And if I tell you, don't keep her waiting." It took 2 more hours and a long drive up a winding coastal road, but Griffin finally reached it. A small bed and breakfast tucked along the cliffs north of Greyhaven. Waves crashed below, and gulls called in the wind. The place was quiet, simple, just like Mira had described wanting once in a conversation they'd had while staining the porch. The woman at the front desk looked up as he entered. "I'm looking for Mira Lane," he said. She didn't blink. "Cottage 3. He walked the gravel path, sketchbook in hand. The door was slightly ajar. He knocked anyway. She opened it, and the moment their eyes met, everything else fell away. She didn't ask how he found her. He didn't ask why she left. He simply held out the sketchbook. "I saw your story," he said quietly. "Now I want to be in the next chapter." Mira stepped forward, eyes full. "You already are." The cottage smelled of sea air and chamomile tea. Griffin stood in the entryway, his boots damp with ocean spray, unsure whether to sit or simply keep breathing. Mira had let him in without hesitation, but there were no guarantees in the space that followed. Only unspoken questions. She poured the tea silently and handed him a mug, their fingers brushing. Outside, waves crashed against the cliffs like applause, loud, unpredictable, wild. But inside, everything felt still. "Is Max okay?" she asked gently after a long moment. "He misses you," Griffin replied. "So do I." She nodded, her eyes locked on the steam curling from her cup. "I thought leaving was the brave thing," she said. "I thought if I could get far enough away from the world I came from, I'd be safe." "Were you?" he asked. Mira looked at him. "No," she whispered, "because safety without belonging is just solitude dressed up as peace." Griffin sat across from her at the small pinewood table. No tablecloth, no centerpiece, just 2 people and everything they hadn't said. "You don't owe me anything," he began. "I know. But I need to tell you something," he continued. "When you walked into my life, I didn't know I needed anything. I thought Max and I had found our rhythm, Simple, predictable, safe. He paused. But then you sat on our porch swing like it belonged to you. And suddenly, I couldn't imagine the porch without you on it. Mira blinked slowly, her fingers tightening slightly around the mug. I left because I was scared, she admitted. Scared I'd ruin something pure. You and Max, you reminded me what real looks like, and I didn't think I could hold on to it without poisoning it with all the mess I come from. You're not poison, Griffin said firmly. You're a person, and people, they bring their whole selves, the broken and the brilliant. Silence again. Then she whispered, You said once you don't try to fix people, you just listen to their stories. Griffin nodded. She reached for something beneath the chair, a cloth-bound journal, thicker than the sketchbook he'd found. She pushed it across the table toward him. My story, she said, all of it. He didn't open it, not yet. I want to earn that, he said. You already did. They spent the afternoon walking along the cliffside trail behind the cottage. The wind teased Mira's hair into her eyes, and Griffin found himself reaching out, gently tucking a strand behind her ear, fingers grazing her cheek. Neither of them spoke for a while. Words had done enough damage in her life. Now, it was presence that would have to rebuild. You know, Mira said after a long while, the first time I ever felt like myself was on your porch. Not in one of my father's houses, not in a private jet, not in any of the carefully curated rooms I was raised in. She glanced at him. Just there, on that swing, with Max's drawings taped to the wall and cornbread crumbs on the table. Griffin stopped walking, turned toward her. You can come back, he said. You don't have to stay hidden, not from me, not from him. Her eyes shimmered with something unspoken. I want to, she breathed. But it has to be on my terms. He nodded. Then let's build it that way, together. That evening, they returned to the cottage, salt in their hair, sun on their skin. Mira made pasta with basil from a tiny windowsill plant, and they ate in the glow of golden hour. After dinner, Griffin took out the sketchbook she'd left behind in Pine Ridge. I brought this, he said, laying it between them. Mira smiled, fingers brushing the edge. I left it behind because I thought it was the end, she said. And I brought it because I think it's the beginning. Before Griffin left that night, Mira walked him to the front door. The sea was darker now, the stars beginning to blink alive in the sky above. She stood on the threshold barefoot, arms wrapped around herself. He reached into his coat pocket, pulled out a folded drawing. Max's, the one with the 3 stick figures on the porch swing. He asked me to give this to you, Griffin said. Mira unfolded it, eyes misting as she traced the crayon lines. He said, Griffin added, that you forgot to draw yourself in the next picture. She looked up. Griffin stepped closer. I think you should, he said softly. She didn't reply with words. Instead, she leaned forward and rested her head on his shoulder, just for a moment, just long enough for the world to fall silent again. Not out of fear, but out of peace. The next morning, Griffin woke in Pine Ridge to the chirp of birds and the smell of dew. He brewed coffee, scrambled eggs, and packed Max's lunch with a little more care than usual. As Max buckled into the truck, he looked up at his dad. Did you find her? Griffin smiled. I did. Is she okay? She will be. Max tilted his head. Did you tell her she can come back? I told her the door's open. Max nodded, satisfied. She's probably drawing us right now. Griffin chuckled as he pulled out of the driveway. Yeah, maybe she is. Far up the coast, Mira sat at her desk, a blank sheet of paper before her. She picked up a pencil, and for the first time in a very, very long time, she drew herself, Not as she'd been, but as she was becoming. The sound of tires crunching gravel outside the Wade house wasn't unfamiliar, but Griffin knew, before he even looked up from the porch swing, that this wasn't the mail truck, or a neighbor, or a local delivery van. It was too quiet, too smooth, too deliberate. He stepped onto the porch just as the black Rolls-Royce pulled into the drive. It gleamed under the April sun, absurdly out of place among the modest homes and rusted mailboxes of Pine Ridge, the kind of car that turned heads in Manhattan, let alone on a quiet street where people still waved from their porches. But Griffin didn't flinch. He didn't smile either, not yet. He just waited. The driver stepped out, same one as before, neat suit, neutral expression. He circled the car, opened the rear passenger door, and there she was, Mira. But not the Mira who had arrived in town weeks ago in worn boots and borrowed courage. Not the runaway. This was a woman reclaimed. Her dress was simple, blue linen falling just below her knees, but it moved with her. Her hair was tucked behind her ears, her chin lifted, eyes steady. She walked up the path with the grace of someone who no longer owed the world an apology. Griffin didn't move toward her. He let her come to him. Because that was the point now. She had chosen this. Mira stopped at the bottom of the porch steps. "I didn't call first," she said, a hint of breathlessness in her voice. "I know. I didn't want to ask if it was okay. I wanted to trust that it would be." Griffin took one slow step forward. "It is." He didn't ask questions, didn't demand explanations. Instead, he extended a hand. Not to take hers, to help her up the steps. And when she placed her hand in his, it felt like closing a circle that had always been meant to finish here. Inside, Max's voice rang from the hallway. "Daddy, did someone just—" He stopped when he saw her. His face lit up so fast it startled her. "You came back!" he shouted, and ran full speed across the room. Mira knelt just in time to catch him. He wrapped his arms around her neck, tight, messy, real. "You didn't say goodbye," he mumbled. "I know," she whispered. "And I never stopped wishing I had." He pulled back, looked at her face, then grinned. "You smell like the beach." She laughed through the blur of tears. "That's because I brought a little bit of it with me." She reached into her tote bag and handed him a smooth piece of sea glass, sky blue, shaped like a tear. "It's not perfect," she said, "but it used to be part of something whole. Then the ocean got to it." Max held it up to the light. "It's still beautiful." She looked at Griffin. "So are second chances." They spent the afternoon like nothing had broken. Because maybe, in the quiet hours of drawing and walking and missing, something hadn't broken at all. Something had just taken longer to arrive. Griffin made iced tea, Max dragged Mira into a game of backyard catch, and the porch swing held all three of them by sunset. As light faded, Mira pulled a small envelope from her tote bag and handed it to Griffin. He opened it carefully. Inside was a folded deed, a transfer of ownership, one line written in ink. "The Harper House is now in your name." Griffin looked up, startled. "Mira!" She shook her head gently. "It's not a gift, it's a home, for you, for Max, for the people you'll teach, the lives you'll rebuild. I have others. But this one belongs to the hands that brought it back to life." Griffin was speechless, not because of the gesture, but because she'd understood. She wasn't trying to repay him, she was joining him. "I want to start over," she said, "but not from scratch, from here, from us." He looked at her, then at Max, who had fallen asleep in her lap, his hand still wrapped around the sea glass. Griffin leaned forward, touched her hand. "You're already here," he said. "And we've been waiting." That night, Mira stood on the porch alone, looking out over the quiet street. Griffin came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "You sure?" he asked, voice low. "About what?" "About staying." Mira turned to him. Her eyes were calm, anchored. "I've been admired, protected, expected, managed," she said. "But with you, I've only ever been seen." He rested his forehead against hers. "And what do you see when you look at me?" he whispered. She smiled. "A man who didn't try to save me, just sat beside me until I saved myself." They didn't say anything after that. There was no need. The porch swing creaked once, then settled. The stars blinked. And in that silence, without spectacle or song, love arrived fully. Not as something discovered, but as something remembered. It wasn't a wedding. There were no tuxedos, no rented chairs, no floral arches or diamond centerpieces, no orchestra waiting to play, no photographers darting around with lenses the size of dinner plates. But there was sunlight. There was laughter. There was lemon bread cooling on the windowsill, Max's crayon banner fluttering over the porch that read, "Welcome home, Miss Mira." And there was love. Quiet, steady, bone deep. That morning, Griffin stood barefoot in the yard, his hands dusty with sawdust and rosemary. He'd built a long cedar table beneath the oak tree, and Max had helped to tie mason jars filled with wildflowers along its edge. The porch swing had been polished. The wind chimes Mira brought back from the coast whispered in the breeze. And Mira? She was in the kitchen, barefoot too, twirling to old Ella Fitzgerald on the radio, her laugh rising like a skylark. Her hair was pinned up with a pencil. She smelled like honey and sun. Griffin watched her through the window. He didn't need a ring, didn't need a vow whispered before a crowd. This was the vow. The life, the morning, the fact that she had stayed. By early afternoon, a few neighbors trickled in, those who had known Griffin and Max since Emma passed, and had silently hoped that one day their house would hold more than memory. There was Mrs. Callahan, with her famous peach cobbler. Dottie from the library, who brought a book wrapped in twine. The Thompsons from down the road, with a jug of sweet tea and a fold-up bench. No one asked questions. No one needed to. They saw the way Griffin looked at Mira, the way she looked back, and that was answer enough. Max stood on the porch holding a clipboard, reading from a piece of paper with more scribbles than legible words. "Ahem," he said, squinting in the sun. "We are gathered here today to make things official, and to eat cake." Laughter rippled through the yard. Griffin stood beside Mira, his hand wrapped around hers. Max continued, his voice steadier. "My dad is really good at fixing stuff. But Miss Mira, she fixed him, sort of. And he helped her fix her too. That's called teamwork." Griffin felt Mira's fingers tighten gently around his. Max looked up. "So, now we all agree that she lives here forever and helps with homework and makes grilled cheese the way I like it." More laughter. Mira wiped a tear from her cheek, nodded solemnly. "I accept these terms." Max grinned. "Then I now pronounce you a team." He threw both arms up as neighbors clapped and cheered, and Griffin lifted him into the air for a spin before setting him down between them. It wasn't traditional, but it was theirs. Later that night, after the guests had gone, the candles burned low, and the sky turned violet with dusk, Mira sat on the porch swing wrapped in an old quilt. Griffin brought her tea and sat beside her. Max already asleep inside with his arms around the sea glass she'd once given him. She looked at Griffin. "You ever think about how many tiny things had to go right for us to meet?" He smiled. "Or how many things had to fall apart first?" She nodded. "Sometimes the breaking is what makes room." He leaned his head against hers. They rocked in silence. The stars blinked on above them. 2 months later, the Harper House officially reopened, not as a private home, but as the Wade Lane Community Workshop, a place for anyone who needed to build something new. Griffin taught his first woodworking class to a group of recently released veterans. Mira coordinated scholarships for single mothers. Max hosted an art wall called Draw Your Second Chance, where anyone could tape up a picture of the life they dreamed of having. One morning, a woman walked in wearing worn shoes, no purse, and eyes full of apology. Mira stood to greet her. "I'm not here to ask for anything," the woman said. "I know," Mira replied, smiling gently, "but maybe it's time someone gave you something anyway." She led her to a stool, offered her tea, and placed a pencil in her hand. The Rolls-Royce had long since been returned. Mira had written to her father finally and told him, "The life you wanted for me was never wrong, but it was never mine." He didn't reply, but Harper Lane did. Every week she sent fresh lavender to Pine Ridge, tucked in brown envelopes with handwritten notes. One simply read, "You didn't just find your way back, you lit the path for others too." One evening, as summer softened into fall, Max asked a question at dinner. "Do you believe in miracles?" Griffin looked at Mira. Mira looked at Griffin. And in that shared glance, filled with everything they'd fought for, fled from, healed through, there was only one answer. "We live in one. Before we go, we'd love to hear from you." Where in the world are you watching from? Are you tuning in from a quiet town like Pine Ridge, or perhaps from a big city where kindness sometimes feels like a rare treasure? Take a moment to say hello in the comments. We read every word, and your stories mean the world to us. And if this story touched your heart, we invite you to subscribe to the channel, not for the numbers, but so you never miss a moment of warmth, hope, and the gentle reminders that love and second chances can show up when we least expect them. Thank you for spending your time with us. Until next time, stay kind, stay open, and never stop believing in quiet miracles.